Hello and welcome to this quick start video of how to use InfluxDB's v3 client library for Java. The Java library can be found on GitHub at this given URL, and it can be installed using Maven by typing the following lines or using Gradle. So let's dive right into it. All I have here is a Maven Java project. It's just a bare bones command line application. And the first thing you want to do to add InfluxDB is to add a dependency just like this. And in my case, I've checked the version number. This is the latest version. I wanted to use the latest version. Highly recommended to use the latest one, and you can find that in the project's GitHub repo, which I'll show at the end. If you're using Gradle, we have similarly command that you can add to your Gradle project, and that will add InfluxDB library. Other than that, it's just a standard Maven project. So it has JUnit and other things, other plugins to basically build the jar, etc. The other thing you need are your InfluxDB account information. So those you will find when you log into InfluxDB, your serverless cloud, or whichever account you're using, whichever cloud version you're using. In my case, I'm using the serverless cloud, and I need three informations here. So the host information, which is the host URL that you can find when you log in. You can also find the API token information, so you'll paste that information here. And finally, you will paste the name of the bucket. And these three are saved as environment properties in this file called local properties. Now this file is in my root directory. You can place it somewhere else. For demo purpose, I've just placed it in the root of the folder. And make sure not to check into your version control system because it has private credentials, so we want to keep those secure. Finally, you have all that. Let's look at our source main application, which is the app.java. Here, it's very straightforward program. It has main method. And the first thing we have done is we have imported certain libraries, essentially the two classes we need to handle InfluxDB client operations. We want to load local properties, so I have utility for that, and then some other helper Java classes. So here I have created three static variables. Now these gonna have the credential information. So to load these, I've created a helper method here called load properties. All it does, it basically reads the properties file, and within the properties file it will read three properties: InfluxDB host for getting the host information, the bucket, and the API token, and saves that in these variables. And we're doing IO operations, so I've wrapped that in a try catch block here. So if we look at our main method, that's the first thing it does. It loads these properties, so we have information here. And then second thing it does, inside a try statement, it creates the instance of our client. And to create the InfluxDB client object, we call getInstance method, and we provided three arguments: the host URL, token, database name, which is same as your bucket name. And once you have the client object created, then we pass it to two methods here: write data, where we will write some data, and then we will query the data. So let's have a look at the write method. Write method is very straightforward. It's using something called a point object. Now point is basically, it's a data point which has all the information about the data that you want to write. So in my case, first thing I provided is the measurement, which is the name of our measurement, or in a simple SQL language, you would consider this as a table. And then we are providing it the tag information, which comes in key value pairs. So in my case, the example is about doing a census for insects in different cities. So here, I live in London. I found 103 bees. So that would be the field. And the metadata is in my tag, location London. Bees, I found 103. And finally, I've added a timestamp as well. Now in my case, I'm calculating the current time and subtracting 10 seconds from that, just because it's a historical data. If you're doing a real-time operation, you don't have to subtract it. InfluxDB also provides timestamp if you don't provide the timestamp value. Here, finally, I call the writePoint method and I pass it the point object we just created. And it will print if this goes successfully, data written to the bucket, otherwise it'll give you an error with a helpful message. And then lastly, we are going to query this data. So inside query data method, a couple of things I'm just doing, make sure, so we can read the data. It's formatting how the print out would look like. The most important part is the SQL statement, because in our v3 InfluxDB, we support SQL. I'm writing a SQL statement here, a standard SQL statement, which says select 3 different values, location and NBs, from census measurement, where the time is basically the last 7 days. Current time minus 7 days interval. And I also want to make sure I don't get any nulls. So I have an AND clause where I'm taking out any of the values that are null. And finally, I want to look at it sorted out by time in an ascending order. Now this query, it gets passed when we call client.query and we pass the string. What that returns is basically an array of stream. So we're gonna loop through this array of stream objects, and we basically will get different rows, and we want to parse through these rows, and we want to get values for our variables, because we're interested in seeing, the location, show me the location, what was collected at what time. And this will be coming from our bucket, and it will be printed out nicely. So again, I do this in a try-catch block, and now it's time to run the project. So I'm just going to do a Maven clean package to build it, make sure there are no errors. And looks like that went through. So I'm going to run the jar project. Now to do that, there is one thing you need to make sure is you're passing in this argument. This argument is needed by the underlying framework. So you just want to make sure, instead of doing just java-jar, you provided this line. This is documented in our documentation as well. And you just want to type this in, because this provides the right argument to the JVM. And then we have the jar file, which is in my target directory. So if I run this, there you go. It executed both the queries. Basically, it did everything we wanted it to do. So it wrote the data and it printed out data as written to the bucket. And now here it's printing it out for the last 7 days, all the census data. And we can see that I just found 103, which was 103 bees. And this is my current time as of this recording in London. So I hope that helps you. Lastly, I just want to show you the GitHub repo where this Java client library actually lives. So you can search for this on GitHub, or you can come to this from our documentation as well. Make sure it says InfluxDB 3. This is the v3 client library. Here again, we can find the instructions on how to add it for Maven or for Gradle. And then we have some examples on how to use it, use some of its classes and methods to do insert, query, those type of operations. So we show you how different ways to do this, like we just did using SQL, but you can use it doing with a parameterized SQL or with the InfluxQL as well. And then finally, you can also use their point values when you want to read the data back, etc., etc. So I encourage you to go through this documentation, go through some of these examples. If you have any questions, comments, you can always reach us through our Slack or communities page, or you can also open an issue here. Finally, you're welcome to give it a star. Thank you very much.